I will admit I'm entirely discombobulated. I can't get my mental equilibrium back together. I can't believe that there's an occupant in the White House who actually thinks you can shoot people in the legs to prevent them from crossing into the United States, or for that matter, build some kind of moat filled with crocodiles or alligators and snakes to achieve the same end. He's clearly mentally ill. I mean, you don't need a psychiatric assessment to tell you that the guy is a certifiable lunatic. And he heads the United States. He heads it at a moment in time when there are such pressing international issues. We've got to deal with climate change. We have to deal with communicable and non-communicable diseases, global health, areas that my colleagues and I are very familiar with and anxious about. We have to deal with trade relationships which are breaking down, arms treaties which are being dismantled. And yet everything is a distraction because of Trump. Just before I sat down to do this commentary, across my computer screen there came the news piece from the Washington Post that Trump was now asking China to investigate Biden and his son, and so we will be obsessed with impeachment. It's really impossible, these distractions. And as a result, things go by the way, which shouldn't go by the way. For example, 10 days ago, when we had that famous climate summit in New York at the UN with Greta Thunberg, adjacent to it, there was a high-level meeting on universal health coverage. Nobody even knows about it, as it happens, but more prime ministers and presidents spoke about health than spoke about climate. And of course, the health summit ended with a declaration of 50 or 60 paragraphs, that sort of usual UN expostulation meaning very little. But in fact, there was one terrible missing ingredient in that declaration. It never dealt adequately with women and girls. But that went by the boards because no one was paying attention. Similarly, over the last 2 or 3 days, I would bet that not many people know that the United Nations has been discussing Sustainable Development Goals, the goals that were set in 2015 to achieve the world's welfare by 2030. And in fact, we're learning that the goals are not being achieved, that they're falling apart, that particularly in the areas of poverty and health and education, we're in grave difficulty, largely because the Western countries, the wealthy countries, are cutting back on their financial contributions. It's a dreadful state. And yet, no one is paying full attention to it. I remember just a few days ago, Jeffrey Sachs, the famous economist, in dealing with the Sustainable Development Goals, wrote a column which indicated that 15 of the world's richest people hold a total wealth of $1 trillion. Jeff Bezos and Warren Buffett and Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg, $1 trillion. And Jeff was pointing out that a tiny percentage of that $1 trillion could well handle all of the needs in the goals. As a matter of fact, he also pointed out, and it's worth it as a vivid reminder, that the age of expectancy, life expectancy globally now is 72 years. And this year, 5 million children under the age of 5 will die from preventable diseases. How do you square that juxtaposition? But you don't square it, because all eyes are elsewhere, because all eyes are on the occupant of the White House. It's just awful. And what's most awful of all, he won't be gone for another year or so. That was last week. I'm Stephen Lewis.